Good evening. I would like to call to order the January 22nd, 2024 Lake Washington School Board meeting. Let the record reflect that all school board members are present and our student representatives are also present, Shira and Ella. The board values public participation and engagement in the meetings of the board. Board meetings will continue to be live streamed on the Lake Washington School District website and are available for viewing following the conclusion of the board meeting. The public are always welcome to email any individual board member at boardmembers@lwsd.org. Director Stewart, would you please read our land acknowledgement?
Yes, thank you. The Board of Directors of Lake Washington School District acknowledges that our district is on the indigenous land of the Coast Salish peoples who have reserved the treaty rights on this land, including the Duwamish and the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. We thank these caretakers of the land who have lived here since time immemorial. We commit to continue collaborating with our Native community to teach the indigenous history of this land and these local tribes to all children of the district. We also commit to provide the best possible education for all children of Native descent who attend our schools.
Thank you, Director Stewart. I will now entertain a motion to approve the January 22nd, 2024 agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Has been moved by Director LaLiberty and seconded by Director Yoakum to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. We have several recognitions this evening. Our first is the recognition for Career and Technical Education Month for the month of February. Director LaLiberty, will you please read our proclamation?
Whereas career and technical education offers students the opportunity to gain the academic, technical, and employability skills necessary for true career readiness. And whereas students in career and technical education programs participate in authentic, meaningful experiences that improve the quality of their education and increase student engagement and achievement. And whereas career and technical education provides students with career exploration opportunities earlier in their educational experience, which enables them to make informed and beneficial decisions about their academic coursework as well as pursuit of established programs of study and career pathways. And whereas leaders from business and industry nationwide report increasing challenges, I'm about halfway through now, related to the skills gap in connecting qualified professionals with available careers in critical and growing CTE-related skills, including healthcare, energy, advanced manufacturing, and information technology. And whereas career and technical education prepares students for these and other fulfilling careers by offering integrated programs of study that link secondary and post-secondary education and lead to the attainment of industry-recognized credentials, and whereas that employers have access to a qualified workforce having access to a qualified workforce is a crucial step in ensuring productivity among the business and industry communities, as well as continued American economic growth and global competitiveness. And whereas Lake Washington School District has approximately 22,933 students participating in 109 career and technical education options taught by 153 career and technical education teachers, therefore, the Lake Washington Board of Directors do hereby proclaim February 1st through 29th, 2024 as Career and Technical Education Month in Lake Washington School District.
Thank you, Director Liberty. We also have a recognition for National School Counseling Week, which is the week of February 5th through 9th. Director Guthrie, would you please read our proclamation?
Whereas Lake Washington School District's 95 school counselors help students reach their full potential, and whereas school counselors are actively committed to helping students explore their abilities, strengths, and interests and talents, as these traits relate to career awareness and development. And whereas school counselors help parents focus on ways to further the educational, personal, and social growth of their children, and whereas school counselors work with teachers and other educators to help students explore their potential and set realistic goals for themselves, and whereas school counselors seek to identify and utilize community resources that can enhance and complement comprehensive school counseling programs and help students become productive members of society. And whereas comprehensive developmental school counseling programs are considered an integral part of the educational process that enables all students to achieve success in school, therefore, the Board of Directors do hereby proclaim February 5th through 9th, 2024 as National School Counseling Week in Lake Washington School District.
Thank you, Director Guthrie. And finally, our last recognition is the 2024 board recognition. Deputy Superintendent Gillingham.
Very much. So a proclamation has been issued by the governor that January 2023 is School Board Appreciation Month. In honor of School Board Appreciation Month, we'll take a moment to recognize our board members and student representatives and present them with certificates, building the future of public education for their school district and community. Serving on a school board is a challenging role. It requires leadership, vision, and a deep commitment to multiple stakeholders. And we appreciate the role that our board serves as a crucial aspect of democracy. As an elected official, school boards are charged with the success of the children and young adults in our community. Board members are locally elected, non-salaried public officials entrusted with the task of providing direction and governance to the school district, ensuring the creation of shared vision, plans, and goals that reflects the common values and core beliefs of the school community, setting sound written policy, hiring, setting goals for, and evaluating the superintendent, overseeing employment processes for other school employees through policy, monitoring and evaluating the financial health of the district, using ongoing two-way communications and transparency to build trust and support among a community, board, superintendent, staff, and students, and acting as a governance body. Want to also acknowledge that our school board was recognized by WASDA as a board of distinction for the third year in a row, so congratulations to our board. And to honor our board of directors, we'll be donating literature to our libraries in their names and asking that each board member to select an elementary, middle, and high school, and we will be working with the school librarians at those schools to select a book from their wish list. So please join me in thanking the Lake Washington School District Board of Directors for their service.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is public comment. The Board of Directors of Lake Washington School District welcomes the public to the business meetings of the board and encourages community engagement. The board dedicates 30 minutes to hear from the public during the public comment period of the meeting. Participants should not expect a response from the board at the end of their comments, as we dedicate this time to listening to your voice and would like to get as many members of the public an opportunity to speak as time allows. Members of the public can sign up to participate on the district website at lwsc.org/board/public comments. Sign up closes at noon on the day of the board meeting, and comments will be offered in the order of sign up. I'd also like to remind everyone here that this is an opportunity to engage in dialogue. It is also an opportunity to model respectful discourse to our community, even around extremely personal and difficult subjects. We ask that the audience refrain from commenting and from prolonged applause following each comment, as it takes up time and it prevents us from listening to as many speakers as we can fit into our dedicated 30 minutes. Once the public comment portion of our business meeting concludes, we ask that everyone who is not interested in listening to the rest of the agenda items exit quickly and quietly in an orderly fashion so that we can continue with the rest of our meeting. Public comment will now begin at 7:12 p.m. And the first person that we have signed up is Sarah Duke. And just as a reminder, you've got 3 minutes and the stoplight will cue you. It will turn yellow at 1 minute, and you should wrap up by the time it turns red. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. All right, good evening. I'm a mom of a 4th grader in Lake Washington School District. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, children learn about racial, ethnic, and religious differences and biases related to them from an early age. they learn from their first teachers, their parents. By the ages of 2 to 4, children can internalize racial, ethnic, and religious biases, and by age 12, many children become set in their beliefs. In review of the social emotional learning curriculum at my child's school, the value of equality is not being taught and discussed. However, this is an American value enshrined in our Constitution. Yet it is not until grade 5 or later that children are taught about the U.S. Constitution. Lake Washington School District has one of the most diverse student bodies in the state, with 34% of students of Asian or Pacific Islander ethnicities, 10% Hispanic, 2% Black, and 8% are 2 or more races. The majority of our students are non-white, yet equality is missing from the elementary social emotional learning that is taught. Furthermore, Lake Washington School District has many families who have dual passports or citizenships from other countries. This American value of equality is not a societal value in some of those countries. For example, Israel passed the Basic Law in 2018, which recognizes, I quote, "The right to national self-determination is unique to the Jewish people." This law encourages racial segregation and discrimination. Currently, this legislative session at the Capitol is reviewing and voting on a proposed bill to make education on genocide mandatory for all public school students in middle, junior high, and high schools. The 8 stages of genocide include classification, discrimination, and dehumanization. It should be noted that all of these elements have been entrenched for decades prior to the current genocide occurring in Gaza, and just as they paved the way for the Holocaust, the weapons of hate have been yielded in 20-plus genocides that have occurred since the Holocaust. How can we prepare students for this mandatory course of study if we are not teaching them the American value of equality at their earliest stages in school? Other SEL elementary curriculum topics include empathy and respect. But what do these values matter if the core foundational value of equality is not first taught? Without first teaching equality, SEL can result in children learning to be empathetic, kind, and respectful, but only to other children that look like them or who have the same religious identity. So I'm requesting the board to address this critical gap in elementary social emotional learning curriculum. I've also reviewed the Lake Washington School District Equity Team's annual report, and I have to say it's very shallow in activities that directly engage students. Supporting student affinity groups is
If you
the
could
bare
wrap up your
minimum.
comments.
That's just the basic inclusion. Beyond that, there is a complete lack of inclusion of the student voices in equity activities that support leadership, agency, and empowerment. The school district can learn a lot from North Shore, where Black Lives Week is sponsored and where high school students are given the opportunity to participate in a day-long student justice conference. It's absolutely shameful that Lake Washington has a more diverse student body than North
Could you
Shore.
please wrap it up?
Yet so little engagement with Arab, Asian, Black, Hispanic, Indigenous students of all faith backgrounds is actually being done to ensure their voices are heard on issues that matter to them.
Thank you. The next person we have speaking is Jihad Abdel Hafez. And please correct me if I said your name
Just
incorrectly.
Egyptian, so we pronounce it as Gihad.
Gihad. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, may peace be upon you all. My name is Gihad Abdul Hafiz, and I'm the mother of 4 kids, 2 of which attended Lake Washington School District, and I had to pull them out of the school because now they are homeschooled due to safety concerns and bullying that was not addressed by the school until my son was physically attacked in one of these situations. Socio-emotional learning has been a foundational part of our kids' education. This is what allows kids to safely comprehend their emotions and demonstrate empathy and expect empathy from others, especially their teachers. Inclusiveness also is what ensures that all students feel safe and are equally supported and heard, that they are free to express their views in a civil manner and are respected as individuals. Following October 7th, the district sent us all emails acknowledging and supporting and showing solidarity with the Israeli families for what they called acts of terror. And as a Muslim and Arabic nation, we are one body, and when a part of our nation is in pain, the most severe pain of the most brutal war that has ever been in the recent decades, We are all in severe pain. When a part of our nation is bleeding, we are all bleeding. And when one of our most precious lands, the land of our prophets, is occupied and massively destructed, we are all in danger. And hence our kids are also in pain and danger. Till today, more than 25,000 Palestinians were killed, and out of which 10,000 are kids. 10 children have lost 1 or 2 of their limbs every day in Gaza, and our school districts is financed by the taxpayers, and those kids are also bummed by the U.S. taxpayers. Yet the district till now didn't acknowledge and show solidarity and support to our kids, nor did find the massive destruction brutal enough to call it an act of terror. This is definitely creating a sense of inequity and unsafety. A propaganda has been distributed by some parents aiming at silencing our kids and weaponizing our solidarity by claiming that free Palestine chants or ceasefire calling is anti-Semitic and calling for genocide, when by facts and numbers the genocide is happening. Islamophobia is on the rise and our kids' safety is jeopardized. We are asking our district officials to ensure the safety of our kids and to stand at an equal distance from all students at times of hardships and guarantee that our kids' rights to protest, express their pains, and teach others about the most brutal war, ethnic cleansing, and genocide that is committed by the Israeli forces. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mira Badarin.
Hi, my name is Mira Bedareen, and I'm a student in the Lake Washington School District. I'm inspired by the Martin Luther King holiday and its focus on social justice. I am humbled to read about the struggles of the Black community in America. I am humbled to learn about their basic asks to be recognized as fully equal citizens and the brutal opposition that they have faced and unfortunately continue to face. How come we do not learn more about the injustices that Black people have faced and their towns have been vandalized and burnt, such as Black Wall Street? Also, this holiday made me think beyond the Black struggle and think about other atrocities communities have faced in history. How come we do not learn enough about the indigenous Native people, which is the largest genocide in history? Why are we not taught about the Rwandan genocide, or the Bosnian genocide, or the Palestinian Nakba, which means catastrophe? How come we are not even touching on current atrocities and genocides, such as the one happening right now in Palestine? Why are we taught about the past mistakes in history if we keep allowing them to happen? Unfortunately, I have a history teacher who actually specifically mentioned to not look at historical context for the recent atrocities in Palestine. Besides narrating a specific point of view, she even brought up religious texts in class to highlight that there are people who are more special than others. How are we expected to become empathetic leaders when we are growing in a bubble and are not invited to use critical thinking to look at historical context and analyze how humans have wronged so many races for greed, money, and power? I am here to request from the school board to create and advocate for a social justice program that focuses on anti-racism and authentic ethnic studies. I believe such education should start as early as elementary schools. And it's astonishing to me that such a diverse school district still doesn't have programs to advocate for social justice at home and globally. If we start teaching kids early, then it will help make a more inclusive environment for minority children and create more compassionate and empathetic children in general. How are we supposed to grow as global citizens if our schools do not emphasize the importance of social justice? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Leon Salame.
Hello, my name is Leanne Salame. I'm a UW student and a member of the Palestinian Youth Movement here in Seattle. I was asked to be here today to share my experiences and insights as a graduate. I was in high school during the 2021 war on Gaza, and something that I noticed is how our school districts are incredibly selective about the struggles and students that they decide to support and care for during times of conflict. Many school districts here in the Pacific Northwest claim to value diversity and inclusivity. Yet, this contradicts much of what we have seen in the Lake Washington School District since October. If anything, all that we have seen is an increase in xenophobia, racism, and Islamophobia. Students have experienced being called terrorists for supporting and standing in solidarity with the Palestinian community. Others have been asked if they were involved in the events of 9/11 for wearing the hijab. Many and many and many more have been silenced and threatened for speaking up about the ongoing genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. The concerned families of the Lake Washington School District ask of the board to take the following into account moving forward. Muslim families and students of the district, including Palestinians, are grieving heavily for the loss of their friends, families, and communities in Palestine. Resources for understanding of what's happening in Palestine and the surrounding regions is needed, especially considering that much of our tax dollars are going towards funding these conflicts rather than improving our own school districts. There is much needed training for staffs on the culture, beliefs, and values of Muslims and Arabs. We ask for the protection of our students that are being exposed to racist and harmful comments, threats, and jokes. General training and highlighting of decorum when it comes to public hearing spaces. We will not tolerate disrespect or derogatory terms for voicing our concerns with the district. Curriculum improvements following the example of other school districts in the area. We advise that the Lake Washington School District considers implementing a curriculum that teaches about Arab and Muslim cultures and addresses the US-backed wars on the Middle East, most recently shedding lights on Palestine and Yemen. We ask of an anti-bias training that is needed both on the school and district levels for staff. I suggest looking into the North Shore School District's approach to these topics as they have truly set the bar for Pacific Northwest districts. And finally, we ask that we are seen and heard. Many of us are grieving despite going out every day with a smile on our faces. Each and every individual in this room is affected by what's happening in Palestine, whether you see it or not. We've expressed our concerns repeatedly, and in all honesty, these asks are not huge. We will take silence as a sign for your true beliefs on diversity and inclusivity. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we've got Akhlaq Khatri. Nope. Okay. And then next we've got Goaria Youssef.
Hello. It's actually Afnan. I made it. Yeah,
Oh.
we switched at the last
Oh,
one.
okay.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Afnan Dallashe. I have 4 kids in Lake Washington School District in Redmond in different levels from elementary till high school. I also volunteer a lot in all of the schools that my kids go to. And I appreciate all the work that all the teachers and the counselors and administrations do for the kids in those schools. I really do, because I know how many hours they put in doing the things that for the kids, for the benefit of the kids. In the last board meeting, many parents talked about changing the curriculum. I agree with that. We need a change, but in a different direction. We need the curriculum to be more inclusive of all people and all backgrounds. We want the schools to really be safe space. And when Lake Washington School District says all, it means all. We don't feel that. So we want the schools to really be safe for the kids to speak their own mind freely inside the classrooms. In one of my kids' social studies class, the teacher expressed her sadness over the Israeli-Palestinian war that's happening right now, as she has family members over there that are affected with this war. But she forbade students to talk or comment or express their own feelings about the matter. In that moment, my daughter, who is a Nakba descendant, Nakba, as she said, catastrophe, she felt silenced. She felt unseen at that moment from the teacher. We need to feel, so the teacher said her objectives, why she forbade that. She didn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. So she was more focused on impact than what the kids really feel inside that classroom. We need to feel uncomfortable when genocide is happening with American funds. We need to rock the boat in order to have change. Our kids need to have spaces inside the school to talk about uncomfortable subjects. You as school district and as administrations and teachers, you need to create that space. Because if the kids can't talk about this with their parents, they need to talk with it, not with the counselor privately, inside the counselor office, but inside the classroom to feel that they are not alone on this subject. They have a community and they stand with those people. Thank you so much.
Next, we have Sarah Damaki. No.
Hi, thank you. I'm coming back to speak about.
You're not Sarah Damaki?
No, I'm not Sarah, but I took her place. She sent me a message on WhatsApp. I took her place.
Okay.
Okay. So, you guys have heard from parents, you've heard from students about the incidences of Islamophobia, children being called terrorists, and children being silenced in their classrooms, and being also put on the spot by teachers to answer for things like their thoughts on 9/11. And I attended a PTSA organized safety and inclusion roundtable earlier last week. And basically, we heard from a Chicana American woman also talking about being called a terrorist in the school because she was brown-skinned and speaking and advocating for a change that others did not support. Obviously, this district has an issue and a problem with Islamophobia. I have not seen any trainings, either at the administrative level or at the teacher level, on Islamophobia. This is the third option, the third thing that I want to make a request that be funded tonight and be implemented, both at the administrative and the school level. That a training for anti-bias and a training on Islamophobia be provided. There are organizations such as the Council of American Islamic Relations, the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, and Muslim ARC. These are three options that can come in here and offer you that training within weeks. And that's what I'm speaking on behalf for Sarah. Thank you.
Next, we have Amir Awad.
I wanted to give my minutes to someone else, if that's okay with you guys. Thank you.
Good evening. I would first like to thank you for listening to my concerns.
Could you introduce yourself?
My name is Tariq Taqiyuddin. I was a part of the LWSD district at Eastlake High School. The topic I would like to address today is the lack of inclusivity within the LWSD educational system as it stands. I firmly believe that many of the major issues taking place around the world are a result of inadequate education that failed in striving to build empathetic and mindful adults. The most recent example of this comes from one of my peers who reached out to me seeking advice in a conversation with another student regarding the events unfolding in Gaza. After a series of back and forth comments, my peer was met with the remark, "I wish you would try me. If you did, there would be one less Palestinian supporter." I am fully aware that it is impossible for the school district to monitor private conversations. However, the question that still lies unanswered is, would this student have felt compelled to make that distasteful comment if he was educated about the situation taking place? The answer is no. When the educational system fails to address sensitive matters, How can you blame the students for lacking empathy and understanding of the topic? The advice I extended to my peer was to give no time to this individual, as violence has been and will always be the language of the narrow-minded. Situations like these have been on the rise and will continue to rise unless the school district acts upon one of their sole duties of educating the uneducated. I sincerely ask and advise once more for a zero-tolerance policy for heinous acts of hatred and belittlement by anyone towards anyone to be a topic of focus when discussing the future of the Lake Washington School District. Additionally, I ask that the school district creates an urgent emphasis on developing a more inclusive curriculum. Thank you.
Next, we have Rachel King. I don't see Arthur Weiner. Mohammed Ahmed.
Good evening, Lake Washington School District board members, parents, and community members. Maybe I should introduce myself. I'm a parent of two students at Ella Baker and Redmond High School, and what I'm going to discuss with you is based on their experiences at their schools. And of course, it's coming from the recent Gaza conflict, which we saw more than 26,000 civilians casualties in just over 100 days. And it's almost known to everyone right now that 60% of them are women and children. And every 10 minutes, a child was lost amid 350,000 destroyed homes. And that's why, with a heavy heart, I addressed a critical issue impacting our community, which is, of course, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and how we are portraying it in our schools, and which is often portrayed in a biased way. The mainstream media and politics usually favor one side, overshadowing Palestinian struggles, unfairly deeming empathy for them as anti-Semitic. This bias affects our students, and actually it impacted my children as well, who only get part of the story while learning global issues. This imbalance hinders their ability to form comprehensive worldview, ignoring one side's suffering. And our education integrity depends on fostering balanced, empathetic discussions, recognizing all humanity in this conflict. And that's why I propose, as a parent, a committee to establish guidelines for presenting this conflict specifically, because it's a conflict that's been going around for a while, and students have been hearing a lot of biased information from both sides. And that's why students need to hear all the perspectives, understand the history, and grasp the human toll. We must create an education environment promoting empathy, critical thinking, and global issue awareness. Esteemed board members, your role is crucial. Balanced discourse in our schools can mold informed, empathetic, compassionate individuals. And in conclusion, remember those who lost in conflict as a motivation for action. I know that this has been going around for 4 months now, and what we're hoping for is that we can to see some action items to be taken. And I understand that there's a lot being thrown at the board, but what I'm hoping personally is to see some of that communication going out differently in our schools and at the district level. So let's educate our future leaders in fairness and respect, and thank you very much for your dedication to our students' future.
Thank you. And then we have someone signed up, Nada A. No? And Alex Lee.
Hello, I'm Alex Lee, and I'm representing, I'm a trustee at Cascadia College. So I'm here to give you a little bit of an informational report about what's going on with Cascadia and give you some updates there. So on February 28th is our Pay It Forward event. And you should have all received an invitation. And this is our first major fundraising event in more than 10 years to financially help students at the college. And we hope to see you there. And also thanks to Director Tran for sending along additional invites to President Murray. Also, I'd like to let you know that enrollment continues to be up in double digits at Cascadia, and the community college average is 7% right now, so Cascadia is actually leading the trend. We have really strong enrollment. And for the Lake Washington School District, here are some stats. So the total running start is up 16%. Lake Washington School District running start students make up 8% of that total, with 75 students represented from the Lake Washington School District. Juanita is our top feeder school, and we have 40 students from Juanita in running start. And Lake Washington High School and Redmond High School have 15 students and 22 students respectively. We're also very interested in artificial intelligence and its impact in the education sector. We hope you are too. We'll be developing a symposium later in the spring and hope that interested parties hope to bring interested parties to campus to hear more about the issue. And you also may have heard that financial aid deadlines and processes are changing. We have a website set up that has the details. We'll be sending you a link this week. And as well, we're trying to organize some financial aid information nights specifically for North Shore students as well as those, and we'll let you know on those dates as well. And Centro Cultural Mexicano in Redmond also has financial aid help available to students if they want to drop by. And wanted to also let you know the Redmond Together Center classes continue to grow. But to maintain this site, we're hoping that more students will enroll in Running Start classes. Your high school counselor should be aware of the class offerings for the spring quarter. And last 2 points are we've approved our Bachelor's of Science degree in Computer Science last month. And the first cohorts are going to be beginning next fall. And we also have a guaranteed engineering path from Cascadia to UW-Bothell that will begin next fall. And then finally, this is for Superintendent Holman, even though he's not here. President Murray is looking forward to getting on his calendar soon. So thank you, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. And that concludes our public comment for this evening. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the... Oh, yes. If you're not interested in listening to the rest of the business meeting, you can go ahead and exit at this time. Thank you. The next item on the agenda for this evening is the approval of the consent agenda. I will now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved by Director Guthrie and seconded by Director Liberty. Deputy Superintendent Gillingham, will you please poll the board?
Director Guthrie?
Yes.
Director Yoakum?
Yes.
Yes.
Director LaLiberi?
Yes.
Vice President LaLiberi?
Same. Yes.
President Choi?
Yes. Motion carries. Deputy Superintendent Gillingham, will you please summarize the donations?
Pleased to announce that this month, the Lake Washington Schools, Lake Washington School District PTSAs are donating $65,237.76 to the districts. We greatly appreciate their generosity to support classrooms and purchasing additional supplies at our schools.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the Inclusionary Practices Program update. Deputy Superintendent Gillingham.
All right. Thank you, President Choi. I'll be presenting with Deputy Superintendent Beebe and pressed into action, Associate Superintendents Rose and Cody are standing by to make sure that we don't say anything inappropriate. So we wanted to give the school board with an update on our inclusionary practices and environments. The board had a study session where we talked about specifically focusing on elementary back in November, and we looked at what some of the inputs were there. There is a lot to this, so tonight's presentation is a survey, not necessarily a deep dive, because we could certainly go deep into any one of these areas. I think our interest tonight is to talk about where we are at in the implementation phase as a district, as we think about it, as we think about providing a schema for how are we essentially able to, or thinking about how we're going to assess our progress moving forward. And so again, we're not going to present everything that we'll be looking at, but some examples of things that we are looking at and attending to. We recognize that some of our board members had provided some comments or questions in advance. We'll try to answer some of those, but those that we don't address during this presentation or in the follow-up comments, Dr. Ullman will be following up with President Choi. And so we use this compass. This comes from Courageous Conversations, and we use this when we think about having conversations around racial equity. As we were thinking about where we're at as an organization, we thought that this was kind of a helpful model because when we're entering these conversations around how we're supporting our students, we all individually are entering from different places. I often enter from the intellectual or the thinking quadrant, so we are all in these places, and it's one where you all may be entering different places as well from these conversations, and so one of the things we start with this is just it's a way of centering ourselves and thinking about kind of just able to check ourselves of how we're entering into these conversations, and also being open to being moved into different places. So.
The other piece of that, I was going to drop in the slide from the study session on adaptive versus technical change. And one of the reasons we included this slide is this work around inclusionary practices is significantly in the adaptive category for change. And so we're really on this journey, and we'll give you a sense of where we are as an organization on that journey, both at the elementary and secondary level. And just wanted to frame the presentation with that sort of view of the work, that it really isn't about the technical pieces of change, although there's some of that work occurring too. It really is about how do we shift a whole system and the way that we approach learning in the classroom to include all kids in that environment. And that is a significant shift for most of us because that is not the environment in school that we came through and had experience with. So, and it is a shift, as Mark has said on more than one occasion, it's a shift for the community too, to be thinking about how are we being inclusive of all students in our classrooms. So we use a tool called the SWIFT FIA, Fidelity Integrity Assessment, in all of our schools. It's a self-reflection tool that principals are using, usually with their leadership teams or sometimes their equity teams, to reflect on where they are in the process of implementation of, I don't remember exactly how many categories there are, but there are categories of implementation around multi-tiered systems of support. So this is a view that we're using in the work around inclusionary practices that all schools are participating in. The 4 categories, Microsoft is giving me a message right in the middle of this. There are 4 categories, really the spectrum of implementation. And these are important to think about because we're going to come back to some data here in a minute, both globally and then later in the presentation around individual schools, to recognize that our schools are in very different places in this journey. Some are already moving into implementing and sustaining work around some things. None of them are fully in implementing and sustaining with this work. So we're early on in the process around the work. So where we are currently is not where we hope to be 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, and that's important to think about in the greater scheme of this work. So we're not supposed to use pie charts, but Chris isn't here anymore, so we threw one in just because it really does represent the idea. So if you look across all of the individual indicators on the FIA, across all of our schools, almost 80% of the work that's occurring is either in the very first phase, which is laying the foundation, or in the installing phase, which is, okay, we sort of got the picture and we're starting to put some of these things into place. And I think that is an important context as we think about where schools are in this work, not just the schools, but in the individual classroom. We are asking a lot of teachers in terms of their own learning and their change of practice to be working around this. And we'll share a little bit of the work that we're doing on the back end to support that work. And it's very intentional work. And then we have a few schools in some categories that are moving towards the implementing and sustaining phase. We had some pilot schools at the elementary level, and some of those schools are in that category. We also have some schools that weren't part of the pilot that have made tremendous strides just in the last year.
And Scott, I think you made a comment earlier today as we were reviewing this too, is sometimes as you learn more, you realize what you don't know. And so it's quite possible that the more that we engage in this work and interrogate what these different terms mean and what does it mean to be implementing or to be sustaining, we may reflect and actually say, no, we're actually maybe not doing that. And so I think we wanted to share this just as a context of just recognizing that kind of on this journey, we're still in the nascent stages of that journey. And there's great work happening. There's certainly a heavy lift that our educators are engaged with our families and with our students, but it's still early days. I think we always want to kind of ground ourselves in, well, why is this critical work? Why are we, this is probably one of the most important conversations or things for us to be focusing on, and certainly we appreciate the board's interest in continuing to examine this. And so part of this is that, our school district's mission is that each student graduates and that they graduate prepared to lead a responsible and rewarding life. And so that commitment is such that, we recognize that we need to make sure that each student has access to the greatest degree possible to grade level curriculum. They have access to engage with their peers, that they have the opportunity to be receiving the best instruction that we can. And so that, along with, and if you go to the next slide, our commitment to equity. This is not picking up, huh? Okay. All right, I'll get a little bit closer. Recognizing that we have gaps in our system, and when the board monitors its report, we can see that disproportionality between the gaps, and so we have this recognition of needing to do things differently in order to be able to change that story for our district. So kind of grounds us there as a start. When we're talking about inclusion, and I think it's important for us to decide, because it's that term, right, in this context, what does that mean? I certainly hope that this is not a term that we'll need to be defining or using much further in the future, because that will signal that it becomes the standard of expectation for how we educate and serve our students in the type of environments. But what we're talking about is that students who qualify for special education services At the elementary level, the biggest change has been historically students have been served in learning centers that weren't at their neighborhood schools. And so the shift for this past year was to say that we're going to serve students in their neighborhood schools. And defining that we want students to participate in general education to the greatest extent possible for them, as determined by their IEP team. But thinking about how we can deliver specially designed instruction, either in core curriculum or in intervention blocks, and as opposed to trying to avoid removing and having kind of exclusive opportunities. And still recognizing that this is a spectrum and that there are times of the day or there's types of services or for students that may need SDI delivered in a different setting, but that's in accordance with their IEP. So we're going to introduce, this will be something new to the board, but it's actually, we have an inclusion advisory committee that we launched and just this past December. And that group is going to be taking work that was developed by the Ties Center, which has been a partner for us along a journey, and examining kind of where we're at as a district and then developing focus areas. The model that they use is called RISE, and so RISE has essentially it's an acronym, but in this case there's essentially 4 areas that we would look at. And the more that we were looking at this model, it's really helpful, I think, for us to say, well, how are we doing in that place? And so tonight's presentation is going to structure and saying, as we're thinking about inclusive education, inclusive practices, holding it up against this framework, and thinking about what are the elements that we're attending to and how do they match back against this. And so those elements are thinking about the placement and setting for students, that so their experience and where our students are experiencing their education, general education, curriculum, content, and access, looking at our instructional practices, and then looking at student and system outcomes. And so tonight we're going to walk through those areas and I think hopefully try to align things that some of which we're already doing or already attending to, but map them back against this framework.
Can you just clarify, on the previous slide, it said that historically students qualified for special education services were served in learning centers, but that was not all students receiving special education services, correct?
Yeah, that wasn't true for all students, so that should be correct.
The majority, I think, were being served outside, and
majority,
so,
yeah. So we had
integrating in a smaller subset. Just wanted to.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification.
I wanted to add too, there was a shift that occurred really in earnest starting last year. Do you remember we did a little panel conversation? Because I think Lisa and Lindsay, you were both here that night, even though you weren't on the board yet. And there was a real intentionality, and part of the reason you're seeing Matt and I present, to shift this from a special education issue to a general education issue. And it's still a team effort, but it really is how do we better support students within the general education setting with the appropriate support from special education, not put them in special education and let them decide how all of that needs to work, although the IEP process is still in play and that's part of the conversation. But that was an intentional shift and some intentionality around why you've seen Matt and I take a more active role and more visible role. Matt supervises the special education department as part of his responsibility, and I have most of the general education line authority for schools with Dale and curriculum and assessment work that Jen does as well. So there's rationale for the center pieces and how we'll talk about those really in a general education sense.
Can I ask questions now, or are you wanting to do that at the end? I can wait.
I'd be happy. Let's answer your question. Let's see.
I can wait. Would that be easier? Are you sure? Okay, so So it's off of just that slide with the inclusion. And you did mention you hope you don't need to define inclusion. Are you going to define inclusion at some point, like tonight, in what is the district's definition of inclusion?
So I think that for now, that's the working definition when we're talking about inclusion in this context. My comment about hopefully there's a future in which it becomes the default expectation.
Yes.
So we're no longer having to call it out as being something unique or separate, because students by default are included, our environments are inclusive, and so recognizing that. So that was
Okay,
what that comment was intended.
So that it will just kind of change as we go, and almost like this year, inclusion means all students in neighborhood schools. Like that is the definition for now. Is that kind of what
it should be evolving? And I think when we go in, so when we met with President Choi to kind of talk about what the content for this, one of the things that I appreciate was that kind of helped us kind of push on some more our thinking is, what is it that we're attending to? How do we know if we're making progress? And so the RISE framework, I believe, really kind of lends itself, because we'll look at what are the things that we're attending to, and you'll get a survey, not a deep dive in any of those particular things, but that's I think is going to present a more holistic picture of the direction that we're going.
The only other piece I would add is, and in some of the board monitoring, we're already looking at some of these things. So we're going to call out a couple of places where you'll see where we hope to see the fruits of this labor.
All right, so I'm going to talk about placement and setting briefly. When we think about placement and setting, the RISE model uses that, saying that what are our policies and practices that are essential when we think about class placement, equal access to instructional, extracurricular activities for students with disabilities. And so one of the ways that is we think about, well, how will we know if we're making progress to be making our schools more inclusive, to improving that level of access? And one of the ways, and this is not all of the data set behind this, but we think about, so students have an expectation of being placed with the IEPs, being placed with the least restrictive environment that's appropriate for them. And we actually have to report to the state and federal government in categories. And so the most restrictive environment is what's considered students who are accessing general education 0 to 39% of their time. And so what this chart indicates is that historically, of our students in special education, historically we'd been 10% or more of students receiving with an IEP had been in that category, that most restrictive category. And you can see over the past 3 years that there's been this change where fewer students with IEPs we're having to report that this is the amount of time that they're essentially spending in general education. And similarly, we would expect to see progress in the other areas, so that students at different levels are being able to access an increasingly amount of general education. So this is one measure in which we can look at that. You can think about more holistically around students accessing other aspects of their life, but in school, so extracurricular participation, those sorts of things. But as we're thinking about, and if we want to go back to that, as we're thinking about placement and setting, there are data sets in which that we can monitor and be intentionally paying attention to that will tell us essentially, are we shifting such that more and more students with IEPs are accessing more and more of the general education setting and curriculum.
So the next portion of the RISE framework was general education and curriculum content access. Well, they can't really access that unless they're in the classroom where that's occurring, so that was sort of the first step. But this is really around what are the practices inside of those classrooms routinely used that are inviting students in. So we've done work over the last couple of years around UDL. We've done whole district training around universal design for learning. That's one way. But one of the ways we've invested heavily in is through this coaching program at the elementary level. And there's intentionality around that, because what we know about professional learning is going to a class that is separate from the context where you're actually doing the work has some value, but it is very hard to translate that learning back into professional practice. And we've seen that. This is my 29th year. That has been true for all 29 years that I've been in public education, that transition from what we learn and do in a professional setting outside of the classroom is really challenging to come back and change practice inside the classroom. So we put a MTSS coach in every elementary school based on our experience with our Cohort 2 pilot schools that were part of the inclusionary work last year. And we did some intentional work around this. We created a new job description that was specific to this role. We hired into this role. And we are spending time, it's usually Wednesdays, pulling these people to do specific work around these things. So we are, in September and January, we were doing work around what does coaching really mean in terms of classroom support. What are the moves you make? What does a coaching cycle look like, and how do you engage in those? How do we engage with data in that process? And then part of our work particularly is around what we learned tonight is non-dominant culture. And I would include our kids who we've brought back from learning centers in that non-dominant sort of conversation. And there's a lot of crossover between what we traditionally would call marginalized groups in our system and special education. And then teaching practices around PSYOP and core literacy. So we're doing a lot of work with literacy. Director Guthrie's on that committee, I believe. Social emotional learning tier 2. So classroom structures are in place around social emotional learning. What does that tier 2 support look like? And how do MTSS coaches engage with that work? Some work around standards-based IEPs. There's some of the technical work that needs to occur. So I was a elementary principal. I sat through a lot of IEP meetings, and I learned how to be a district rep in a very different system. So those are ongoing conversations in our system of what does it look like to have those IEP conversations when the goal is completely different than it used to be. It used to be the service was going to happen over here, and then the classroom would happen over here, and we wanted the kid here as much as possible, but this was really where the service was going to occur. And then you can see sort of the progression over time with the work that we're doing. The point of this, though, was to show that there's intentionality around building the capacity of the coaches to then go back and work directly with teachers in the classroom with the students that they're serving. Just a little bit of data. I think you've seen this before. I think it came in a board brief from Heather. Was it in a brief? No? We saw it at a meeting. So one of the things we are really trying to hold some accountability around for the coaches is actually engaging in coaching cycles, because they can get absorbed into other aspects of support. And the purpose of them is to be direct support in classrooms, helping teachers to take on these practices. So our coaches, I don't remember what the date was on this, do you? December. So as of December, our coaches had engaged in 147 coaching cycles. You can see sort of what the breakdown in the pie chart, sorry Chris if you're ever watching this, you can see in the pie chart the breakdown of what those coaching cycles looked like. The blue section's co-planning, the pink is in the classroom coaching, and that could look like modeling lessons or co-teaching a lesson with a teacher and providing feedback in the moment. Professional learning and collaboration, our coaches have been involved in a lot of the LEAP learning as well and helping to deliver and design some of that at the building level. Planning support, so we've done the UDL training, but it is much easier to do the training than it is to put UDL practices into our planning protocols. And then there's the LEAP. They are not exclusive to just general education classroom teachers, and you'll see that they also are engaging with our special education teachers, because we're also asking our teachers of special education to work differently also. So they're pushing into classrooms more, and they're delivering services in different ways than they used to. Back in my day, it was pull the kids in a small group, put them at the kidney table, and you do some work with them, and then you send them back to class. That is not how all of that looks anymore, and that's a shift that our teachers of special education are having to make also. And then you can look, and hopefully if you've looked at the instructional playbook, which I will talk about here in a minute, you'll see some connections to that work. So that was developed cross-departmentally with teacher support from schools as well, around 10 instructional practices that are culturally sustaining and based on UDL principles. What am I missing? There's one other bullet that I can't remember. And you see that the teachers and principals are engaging in that work, and the coaches are also supporting it directly in classrooms. So a teacher could come and say, I really want to work on the way I'm modeling for students. It's not just about me telling the kids how to do a math problem, but how do I really engage kids in understanding the metacognition behind how I make decisions around that, something like that. And that coach can push in and support that learning right in the classroom with the kids that the teacher has. And then we've also added some additional staffing supports. So as part of our negotiation last spring with LWEA, we changed the staffing ratio for special education services in schools in recognition of the students from the learning centers coming back. So we lowered that ratio, and that generated an additional 8 teachers in the system to support students with special education services. The place that we've had some questions recently is around what are we doing at secondary. We recognize that there will be needs at secondary, and we're sort of in the process of defining what that's going to look like. We know there's going to have to be an investment at the secondary level to support more inclusive practices, particularly in co-teaching models for this work as we move into secondary. We have a whole group of elementary students that are going to start transitioning into middle school and high school, and so it's incumbent upon us to be thinking about that now.
I would just say in our schools and many the board's been out on some site visits where we've been in at secondary levels, co-teaching classrooms, and so we'll talk a little bit more about some of those models. But recognizing that the additional investments we'll need to be able to continue to support our secondary schools to expand the options and offerings that they have for students.
Yep, Mark got a question.
Quick question. Culturally sustaining, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the term, so you said that the teaching has to be culturally sustaining.
Yeah, it's practices that aren't exclusionary, that aren't sort of anti-racist practices. Yeah, good question. There's something I was going to say about, I lost it. It may come back to me. So, general education access, first got to get them in the classroom, then we got to have some practice, and now we're really getting into, well, what does the day-to-day experience for kids look like? And there is very intentional work happening around that, in addition to MTSS coaches. So, we did a lot of work around UDL, 21, 22, or was it 2021? 21, 22, whole district training on UDL. We've done specific modules for LEAP that principals can select from based on where their buildings are for UDL. And the whole idea of that is to design on-ramps or access points for students in your classroom for core content. And that looks different for different kiddos based on the needs of the student and their, I don't know what the right word is, their specific learning sort of need or their ability to communicate back the learning. So, and that's also part of UDL, is multiple ways to communicate learning. So it's not just do it this way or only this way, it's multiple options. So we've done considerable work around UDL. The MTSS coaches are the method by which we're really trying to ensure those practices are taking root in actual classrooms. Talked about the instructional playbook a little bit already. 10 very intentionally chosen practices. I don't know of another district that has gone to this level of specificity around instructional practice. And Jen Rose and her team really led this work along with Emily Young. And there's intentionality now, not just around when we're adopting curriculum materials. So we've always adopted curriculum materials sort of sporadically sometimes in school districts, but that's always been part of the process. What we're really trying to do now is couple practice with materials. So what materials and what practices go together to support this kind of work? Are there multiple on-ramps to the content? Are there, well, it's even as simple as, is there representation of various student needs and abilities within the materials themselves? Anything else you want to add there? Anything else? Okay. These are, Microsoft's alerting me again. These are the 10 strategies. We developed a whole site, or we didn't, Emily and her team and the tech team developed a site on our EPIC, our staff portal, our curriculum portal, around these practices that have examples of what it looks like in our classrooms, has materials that go along with it, differentiates based on age. So what modeling looks like at kindergarten is probably very different than what modeling looks like at Tesla STEM as a senior, although there is some crossover. You just got the red light. What was that about? So very intentional work happening around this. Principals are taking on aspects of this in their building, in their own professional learning. And we set, I think I forgot to put the slide in, but part of our negotiations with LWA this year was around professional learning communities and the time. And so we're redefining how we look at time. And in the past, it's been about controlling. If I control the time, I know that that has been accomplished. And what we did instead this year is we set outcomes. And the outcomes are around these practices from the instructional playbook. So part of that trust conversation we had earlier is really trying to shift the system to trust our educators, that if we set the goal, there's multiple ways to get to that goal. We'll provide some options and on-ramps and materials for you, but you also can do some of this work outside of that context in your professional learning community. So that's a shift in the system that we're still sort of growing accustomed to and learning how to work within a different sort of structure around that. And then I think you've seen this one before. We had the Elementary LEAP professional learning, and we've color-coded it, and we're looking for intentional ways to integrate the work. So it's not equity work is separate from inclusion work is separate from math. So you'll see the UDL practices were part of our math adoption over the last couple of years at the elementary level. But I added, well, Jen added, the secondary professional learning also. So you can see that much of the work that we have done at elementary is also translating to secondary. It looks slightly different. And it has to be accomplished slightly differently because there's so many different content areas that are part of that work.
One thing I'd add,
And you should have some.
just to stress what Scott said about the complexity and how these are interwoven. These LEAP strands were designed at the beginning of the year and really thoughtfully, not just October 20th or December 6th follows October 20th. Like, they're not designed to be separate standalone. They're really intentionally designed to model the professional learning and the practices that we want for teachers from the instructional playbook, and provide more than provide a plethora of resources. So there's choice in each of these sessions for educators where the principal and the teachers and the PLCs can pick different resources in order to differentiate for where they are in their learning as well. So
This is something we used with principals, secondary principals last year, where we were talking about, so how do we start having these conversations around inclusionary practices at the secondary level? And I couldn't figure out how to make an on-ramp in a slide, but that's really the concept, is there's a highway, that's the classroom teaching, and then there's multiple on-ramps into these inclusive practices. And so different schools are taking these on differently. So around the social dynamic, looking at unified schools, unified PE, so we don't have these separate adaptive. My master's thesis was in adaptive PE. We don't really want that anymore. We want unified PE, so kids are in what we would call the general education PE. Increasing extracurricular and sports participation, so it's not separate sports, it's how do we integrate students into the opportunities that are already existing, and what are the accommodations that need to be part of that process. Instructional, we've talked a lot about co-teaching, and that is one way that secondary schools are engaging in more inclusive practices. That's also a place we know there's going to need to be investment, particularly around special education. We have multiple models of that in different schools, so our multilingual services at the secondary level have been exploring co-teaching models for the last couple of years. Special education has also. We've done a lot of work around reducing replacement classes, so and co-teaching is part of that. How do we provide the service so that we're not running this separate class? We're seeing a lot of that around organizational skills instead of having a separate organizational skills class. How do we provide those services? And I'm sad to say it took us this long to sort of get to that place, but that's where the services really need to be, because that's where the struggle is in the gen ed setting or in the classroom setting. And then looking at the various graduation pathways and how we're helping students, particularly with special education services, meet those different graduation pathways. So we all know most of our students in Lake Washington pass ELA and math, SBA in 10th grade, and that's how most kids access the graduation pathway. But not all kids are going to access it that way. So how are we being intentional about helping kids see the other opportunities and plan around that for their high school and beyond plan? And then there's a lot of work going on with leadership. One of the other tools, and we didn't put it up here, but we could include it in a brief or something, is we have this LRE assessment that Shannon Hitch and her team brought to the table as part of the work last year and previous to that. So it's a way for schools to reflect on those environments and to do some intentional thinking about what are the access points. Doing a lot of work around staff beliefs. Beliefs is part of the journey, because if you don't believe the student has a place in the classroom, then chances are the student doesn't have a place in the classroom. And then schools have inclusion leadership teams that are meeting. I don't think that's every school, but some schools are using that as an opportunity to engage and start the conversation around this work. Now, I'm particularly proud, Dale and I had a conversation with them this afternoon. I'm particularly proud of this work because, and we've talked about it here before too, nothing happens in the building without the sponsorship and leadership of the principal. The principal has the second largest impact on student learning past the quality of classroom instruction, and has more impact to scale than any individual teacher because they impact the whole classroom. So we are doing very intentional work with our level directors. We added a third elementary level director because we knew that having 15 separate buildings was spreading them so thin they were not able to engage principals frequently enough to have these ongoing conversations around their leadership for Tier 1 instruction and inclusion. But the work we're doing with the Center for Educational Leadership is really building our internal capacity to continue those conversations after the partnership with CEL is gone. So the principals working in these small PLC groups where they select a host principal, well, each group does, they select a small group of students that are going to be the focus for their year and their study. And then they host the PLC in their building, and the PLC goes and observes in those classrooms where the students are to gather information on the student experience. And it's done very, I don't know what the right word, I don't want to say sanitized, but it's done in a way that suspends judgment. It's about what do you actually observe students doing, and then conversations about how we might engage in conversation with our teachers or support students in accessing the content or the class experience in ways that we would want them to. And I told the story about the one I got to participate in that was the 2 focus students with Heggerty. So the really great thing is the classroom teacher was doing the Heggerty routines, and with a couple of little tweaks, there's ways that we could engage the students who really needed that phonemic awareness, probably more than the other kids in the class at that point. So it started with, here's what we observed, and by the end of it, we had a great conversation and sort of a consulting protocol about how do we have that conversation, what are the next steps for that work in the building. So it's really really elevating, I think, the experience and practice of our principals. We have great principals. It was part of the conversation we were having with Sel, is that they're engaged with multiple districts, and our principals are engaging at a very deep level already, so the facilitation of those is a little more challenging than in a school district that's just starting that work, which I think speaks volumes about the quality of the people that we're hiring and the work that they're doing. So I'm excited about this because it's tying all of the work together around how do I actually lead this work from a principal perspective with the very intentional work in Tier 1 instruction. Dale, you have anything you want to add?
So the final component of the RISE model is looking at the student and system outcomes. And so as we were going through and really reflecting on this, there's a lot of things that the board and the district we're already attending to, but we don't necessarily call out explicitly in the context of our work for inclusionary practices within the system. So kind of went through and pulled out what are the things that we're attending to and how do they connect to these efforts. And then we're going to come back to also saying from a systemically thinking about our MTSS implementation, because that's part of the system outcomes, is are we progressing with our implementation? And as you saw earlier with that first pie chart, we're in the early stages. So as we go through and think about this, the board has 3 results policies. And we already disaggregate that data, and so looking at, how will we know if we're being successful? Well, the results for all of our students should stay the same or improve from where they currently are, and we should see the results for our students with an IEPs. We should see that gap closing or trending upward over time, and so. Results 1, there's a lot of indicators. Probably the most important one is looking at our graduation. So because that's ultimately that's our mission, right? Is to graduate students, and so we're able to look at and say, are we closing that gap? Are our students with special education services? Are they progressing? And some of these changes that we're talking about here might take some. When we think about kindergartners entering, right, this is that's work that's 13 years out. So it'll be critical for us to continue to be looking at this and say, are we moving in the right direction? And acknowledging, I think we had YAIM changed, was no longer used in 2021. And so in that context, maintaining our graduation rate is positive, and yet you can see we're not necessarily closing that gap here. The board gets a whole monitoring report on Results 1. So again, this is when I kind of prefaced earlier that we're not doing a deep dive into any one of these things. just recognizing that as we go through through results monitoring, and Microsoft wants to do something again, that's a way for us to attend and say, are we getting the outcomes? Are we getting the results that we want? So results 2, the next slide, looks at to what extent are our students exhibiting the academic outcomes that we want. So pulled here, 3rd grade reading, which is a core skill, and you can see that generally that's been trending down for all students, and we have a gap for special education. Nice thing is some of these earlier indicators, we will get some much quicker feedback than we will around these systemic lifts than we will for graduation. And so the nice thing is our monitoring policies already have some of these things built into to it. But because also there's a lot, I think as the board gets to the results 2 monitor report, preview is pushing about 100 pages at this moment in time. So we'll have to kind of specifically call out and say what are some of the things where we would expect to see changes happening as a result of the things that Deputy Superintendent Beebe was just talking about. I want to call you Deputy Director. Results 3, social awareness, social emotional learning is an area here. This is an example of considering perspectives, and we already know that we need to expand the way in which we monitor this. But in all of these cases, and I think about we should be attending to the results for all of our students and for students with IEPs. There are some very specific things that, and again, kind of similar to LRE, that we would expect to see some dramatic changes. And so we report to, this is the title on this one is a little bit misleading. Sorry, I didn't catch that earlier. So we report to the state for every incident in which restraint or isolation is removed, and so accounting for that is one of our responsibilities. And over the past few years, you can see that we have had a dramatic decrease in both the number of incidents of restraint and isolation, as well as to a little bit lesser degree, but still a decline in the number of students who are experiencing an incident of restraint or isolation. And this data includes up to fall, this past fall. And when I looked at the data, the vast majority of these reports, the experiences are at the elementary level. And so knowing that that's where we've been making over the past 2 years some pretty significant shifts, this is certainly a promising trend, because it means that there's other things in the environment that are doing that help students regulate and experience that environment. We know that to the point that we're able to avoid adults having to engage in this behavior. So things like this, which we don't necessarily explicitly monitor from like a board standpoint, but we do report to the state and stated that we have, are things that we would be attending to, because they tell us about our students' experience in the school setting.
Kind of like changes in how we support student behavior appear to be making a difference.
Similarly, and this polls, the next 2 slides pull from the OSPI K-12 report card, which is publicly available. So we have on the line on the left indicates the discipline rate. So this is exclusionary discipline. So anytime a student is removed from school, like a suspension, an expulsion. We've known that we've had disproportionality, meaning that students with IEP are more likely to be receive a suspension than students without an IEP. But what we can see here is that while our overall trend for all students without disabilities is continuing to decline, that rate, we've had a decline in the rate of students with disabilities being suspended. So for the last year that the data is available, we're 2.5%. Whereas a couple of years prior that had hovered as high as 4.9%. So again, this is something that we'll continue to pay attention to, what the trend data is. We both want to be reducing that rate, and we want to be closing that gap, so that disproportionality. Last one is another one is attendance. Attendance is tells us kind of two things. One is students learn better when they're generally when they're in school, and being able to access the instruction. It's hard for us to be able to support students when they're not with us, and also to a certain degree, it's also reflective of the environment. Now, we have generally had a pretty high, and you can see that that the gap was for students with disabilities and students without disabilities has historically been pretty small. The COVID pandemic disrupted that, so the gap actually increased, and for all students, our attendance, regular attendance or non-chronic attendance, declined. That gap has starting to kind of come back together, and we're seeing kind of a minor increase in the attendance rate. But again, this would be one of those things that we would pay attention to, and it's data that we report to the states, publicly available, that helps inform how our students are experiencing school, and as well as how well are they doing. And then Scott led us off with talking about the fidelity integrity assessment. So we talk a lot about MTSS, and we use the FIA as a way of saying, well, how are we actually, what are the components? When we talk about MTSS, what are the actual things, the components what does that mean? And so the FIA is broken down into 5 different kind of domains. So we think about leadership. We think about the actual systems of support. We think about to what extent is our educational framework integrated. We think about community, family, and community engagement, and then we think about our policies and structures. And so all of that data, so each one of these in that very far right, each of those areas are areas in which our schools do that implementation. Are they just kind of just getting started? Are they installing? So they're kind of like putting some things in place. Are they implementing? Or are they sustaining? And so I don't know if Jen, if you want to speak to any of these elements a little bit more that you think are important for us to touch on.
In terms of these are all together, and so there's in the actual FIA. The FIA is probably a 30-page document, and it describes really describes Tier 1, and the work that we're doing and all those different pieces comes together to think about how Tier 1 is implemented in a way that's specific. So that's one of the changes that the FIA has really helped us do, is move away from generalized, we want to differentiate, to more specifically, how are we creating the expectations and the conditions and the resources for teachers to be able to create inclusive instruction and differentiate to the level that students can access it.
And I'm just going to, I just got asked a question. What is SWIFT? So SWIFT is kind of similar to TIES. It's a group that's out of University of Kansas that we'd worked with their educational department. We went with this direction because of its strong focus both on equity and inclusion, and thinking about students with being served with IEPs. And so knowing that this was a direction that we were wanting to go in, we wanted a tool that would help kind of assess holistically. And so I'm sure it's an acronym for something. I don't remember, but it's essentially as an organization. And for the most part, we just refer to it as the FIA internally. So, so instead of the pie chart gave you kind of the breakdown of each of these categories. Now you get a stacked column chart. What each of these layers represent is, so each color represents a different school, And then essentially the thickness of that layer is how many items from the FIA are in that category. And again, like I said, we're not going to do a deep dive. But what this really helps us kind of understand and think about is that, when we're using this tool to assess where are we at with our MTSS implementation, you can see that not only are the majority of our schools, but the majority of our items are really at that laying the foundation or installing. And there's very few schools and very few items that are indicating that they're at that sustaining place. And that actually would really probably cause us to call into question the integrity if we had a lot of items in that sustaining, knowing that so much of our work is kind of in these early stages. So this is data that we'll continue to monitor. We would expect over time to see some progress towards the right. And we also may expect that as we learn more, that may cause us to reflect, and maybe we're not as far along. But and we actually break this down in our system. We look at this school by school. The school teams are looking at this. Our school directors who work directly with principals are using this as an informative tool to help think about what are focus areas in their school. What is it that they're looking to influence, and kind of where are they at in their journey? So it's as much for the individual schools and thinking about their journey as it gives us allows us to kind of survey where our schools at. We can also do dives into particular domains. Are there areas which would not presenting to the board tonight, but are there areas where we would expect to be doing maybe closer to that implementing? And maybe our schools are telling us that or not. So this is a tool that, particularly as we think about not only our student outcomes, but just saying what's our progress as an organization, this allows us to kind of quantify that in some way. Director Yoakum?
Is this just elementary, or is it elementary and secondary?
For asking that question. This is actually all of our schools. So so this includes secondary. The next slide, though, is specific to elementary, so in our collective bargaining agreement with LWA, we partnered with LWA to really think intentionally around what are the best practices for supporting students in inclusive environments, knowing that we were going to be moving away from a learning center model. And because we had some of our pilot schools, we were looking at what is it that you're learning, what does the research say, what are some of the best practices. And so in our CBA, there's a number of essentially best practices that we collectively agreed to that we would put into place. And so this past November, we partnered with LWA to survey schools, and we asked them, our principals and the building reps, to work together so that this is a collective effort, and that each of the schools looking at where are you at with these things, and again asking kind of a similar developmental process of have you done this? Are you talking about it? Are you planning on it? And hopefully not received in a punitive way, but we just wanted to kind of know, like, hey, these were a lot of things that, kind of new expectations that were introduced, but we believe that they're really important ones. And so we pulled out, this is just one item that was on that survey that's contained in the CBA, but we had a shared interest that our elementary schools need to have master schedules that allow for intervention to occur essentially outside of core curriculum, because historically a lot of times students would get pulled out, and so a student might get pulled out for reading support and they're missing reading instruction, and it's really hard to be able to pass third grade reading standards if you're not ever in third grade reading. And so that required some systematic work at the school level. And we made that that's an expectation, and it's something that we're monitoring and looking at how our schools doing it. They all do it a slightly different way, but that is an expectation, and it's a shared expectation that we put into. So there's a variety of things that we systemically partnered with LWA on. and are looking at how are we, how are we kind of monitoring and doing those things.
It's also an example of a technical and adaptive change. So changing the schedule is technically not all that difficult. What you do in the context of that schedule is the adaptive part.
All right, and then just lastly, we also surveyed our staff and our community in the fall just to get some of we asked questions of what's working, what's not working, that sort of thing. It was open-ended. The response is kind of a little overwhelming, just because that's a lot of narrative comments to work through. So may come as no surprise. So we turned to AI to help, with the hope that also that by having AI read some of the comments, that it would provide us with perhaps an unvarnished sort of summary. So these bullet points here are actually written by Bing Chat Enterprise, as having read comments and then essentially summarizing the summary, because there was a lot of them. So I can say that our staff and families are having a variety of opinions and experiences would not be an understatement. Some certainly positive, some a bit more challenging. Kind of a value of inclusion, and I think a belief, and Scott kind of mentioned it, that all students have the opportunity to interact with one another and recognize and respect those differences and strengths. So certainly some shared values, but definitely some different experiences, and some frustrations or some interest in thinking about kind of how are we staffing and support. And thinking about our plans and the practices. And so as we're recognizing that we're very much at that laying the foundation and installation stages, it's not surprising, and we'll continue to seek ways to get a variety of feedback from our community and the experiences. I know that we as cabinet members have been trying to be very intentional about being out in our schools, particularly being in our elementary schools, given some of the changes, to really see what that experience looks like, and what experiences that our educators are having, and hopefully seeing the experiences that our students are having. So.
And just acknowledging that we're in the thick of it. The hard work is occurring now, and people are having a variety of authentic reactions to that. And so working through the leadership necessary to lead through that, and supporting both people's opportunities to tell us those experiences and seek solution for, how do we move past that at some point. So some of them were kind of hard to read, but many of them were not surprising at all, given the place where we are. So we just wanted to wrap it up and just give you a couple of things to think about. That this work, I just said it, we're in the thick of it, and the work continues. And so while you didn't see a whole lot of new information tonight, part of that was intentional, because some of these MTSS coaches, I was talking to a principal the other day who hasn't always been real supportive of MTSS coaches, but that principal recognizes we're 6 months into the year, and we need to give that time to sort of build relationships. So coaching, our professional practice is very personal to us as elementary people in particular. And so warming up to the idea of somebody coming in and seeing all of the things I do and providing feedback, that takes some time to build that relationship with the person. So coaches are engaging in those subtle ways of building relationship to be able to do that. And principals are learning how to work with coaches, because we haven't had them before. So we're real intentional about coaches not becoming pseudo-admin, because that's not what they're there for. Administrators evaluate performance, and coaches are really there in a purely supportive mode. But that takes time to sort of build the trust around, to use Lisa's word. Understanding that different schools are in different places, and that's okay because they're all sort of approaching the work and engaging with it in the places that are most relevant to them. And we're trying to push in the support to do that. So Matt and I, it's probably been a month and a half ago now, but we sat down with our level directors and our special services directors and sort of went school by school just to sort of have a conversation about where is this school, what's their learning edge, what's next, and how are we supporting them. So those kinds of conversations are continuing. And then, really just understanding the complexity of adaptive change like this, that this is not, at the end of this year, we will have made progress, and we will have many more years of progress yet to make. So that definition we gave at the beginning is the working definition now, and it will evolve over time. And I think that was it.
Thank you very much. I'm imagining we have some questions. Is there anybody who would like to go first? Director Guthrie?
You talked about what's happening at elementary, what's happening at secondary. What is happening to help that transition from elementary to secondary? I know the board received a comment from a parent who is in the heart of that right now, and it's such a different structure. So it's certainly, there need to be sort of capabilities developed in both that are unique to those. But as parents, we walk that bridge, and so what is the district doing to help with that?
Continued work, because we also heard that at Rose Hill. I don't remember who all was at Rose Hill, but one of the conversations we had with Joe, their principal, was the elementary experience doesn't always translate to the middle school experience where the kids are being moved from 6 different classrooms. So some intentional work around how do we better engage in those transition meetings, I think, and thinking about the supports that students have had at the that particular conversation with Joe, I think, was around the student that we had observed in class had para support, and then it just went away when he went to middle school. And so engaging in those conversations earlier, such that if it really is appropriate that we're weaning a support or changing the program, that's happening long before that 5, 6. So I don't know if that's a great answer, but that's part of the work that's occurring.
Yeah, I think also within our special services department, there's conversations around writing IEPs and what adaptations for IEPs that might be appropriate for making that kind of that transition, as well as broadly thinking about as we're transforming our environments, how does that give us an opportunity to rethink those IEPs? So conversations with case managers who help kind of manage that transition is also occurring. And I don't think we presented I was looking back through, I don't think we presented what additional conversations we're having with principals who are also part of that. So.
Questions? Director Yocum?
I looked back and I saw, I looked at the plan, annual work plan, and it looks like May 8th is the next update for inclusionary practices. And I'm curious, what can we kind of expect from updates going forward? Is it going to sort of be this overall, here are our categories, we're going to give this survey, or we're going to kind of dive deep into each one of these? Or I guess, do you have a structure going forward of what this might look like?
I think that's Dr. Holman and President Choi will have kind of some follow-up conversation in terms of kind of what's the board's interest and what level of depth and what as far as these types of updates. So part of doing these presentations is in response to the board's interest. I will also say I think that there is benefit to the organization because your questions and interests and thinking helps, again, similar with the policy of providing direction for the organization. So that specifically is TBD in terms of what that is, and I think that these conversations help kind of build on each other. So.
Any other questions? Director Guthrie.
So, I really respect the framing of all students are general education students first, and I think we are inching closer to respecting that and honoring that. Yes, it is a journey. And what I'm trying to, am I not? Oh my goodness. So I'm trying to understand, though. I'm trying to see this through the eyes of let's say a parent whose student was in a learning center last year and is now in general education, or is more included in general education. Maybe has moved out of that 0 to 39% bucket. How is what you're going to what you're talking about going to help that student integrate in? Can you connect that a little bit more for me? Of I understand that there's MTS coaches and there's a lot of professional learning going on and so on. What are the gaps for that student's experience today? I know it's hard to generalize, but what are some of the gaps that you see, and what are our next steps to really help those complex learners be more integrated?
That's a really good question, and it calls for some synthetical speculation based on the things that I think that we've seen in a variety of places across our system. So I'll take a first crack at it, and then Scott, if you want to jump in. So I think as we think about kind of like the student's experience, what would certainly, some of what I've seen students having the experience, and certainly what I'd hope to be replicated, is that sense of inclusion, not in the technical sense, but actually being included. And it's been really, it's a kind of the highlight of my experience when I get to go to places where I get to see kids grow up, and it's like, oh, I recognize that student, and what's their experience look like today? And then I always watch to see how are their peers interacting with them, and thinking about kind of the level of peer interaction as compared to adult interaction, particularly for students who, again, our model has often relied on adult interactions, and so seeing students where their peers making inclusive efforts to kind of like, hey, come sit next to me, be next to me, providing opportunities to also help support and advocate for their classmate, and not and to the extent that not always that's the role of an adult. So telling us, is our environment's such that the students are welcoming and belonging and including and seeing each other, their peers as equals. And so that's one thing that we've seen examples of that, and yet can still also be a gap, right? Often we go around, we look at that adult interaction and the adult independence, and so wanting to see, kind of a level of student participation and engagement, and kind of the distance. I was at Rose Hill Elementary School back in December. Just happened to be there, just kind of doing a walkthrough, and went into a PE classroom, and there was a student that was sitting by himself, and my initial kind of response, and I had recognized the student, was kind of like, okay, this is not good, right? Like, we're not really including, but got a chance to talk with the PE teacher, who had recognized that the student actually had self-identified that was starting to become overstimulated, had been participating just prior to that, self-selected to self-regulate, which we would expect and want for all of our students, right? Like, that's a social emotional skill. And the teacher was certainly honoring that, and then went and made efforts just to check in to say, oh, are you ready to re-engage or not, and then respected that. So those sorts of things about kind of the adult interaction, the peer interaction, are ones that we would first kind of really expect to see. I think then looking at, and we didn't go to this level of depth, but we're doing some work right now. It's predominantly with our building leaders. But it's also is occurring at the elementary level with our classroom teachers, particularly through coaching, is looking at how are we adapting standards to make so that concept of UDL of of things that are accessible. So That's both an opportunity where we're seeing ways in which students are able to access from multiple engagement point, multiple means of representation. But sometimes that's also kind of a gap that we sometimes see, is where students are they're there, they may be included from a social context, but that academic sort of connection is still something that we're building. Anecdotally, we've had reports that we've also discovered gifts that our students have that we were unaware of what they were quite capable of, and so that there's students that are participating and behaving ways that in their previous environment we just assumed some limitations for them. So, and for every child in every context, it's different, and that's I think that statement I made earlier, where we know that the experiences right now are really varied across the system, is a true one. When we go out, we see that, and it's going to be difficult to interpret. Had I not asked that teacher in that moment, I would have probably walked away with drawn some different conclusions about what that student's experience was, and so. Scott, do you have
So I'll
anything
boil
to
that down a little more simply. We don't know how to meaningfully include students who are outside of that norm range. And so that's why the MTSS coach, that's why the focus on Tier 1 instructional practice. And it's not because people don't want to, it is, we haven't done that before. We haven't built that muscle. And so the extent, what I'm looking for, in addition to the sense of belonging and kids included and building real sort of productive and enriching peer relationships, is meaningful engagement with content. And so we see a lot of parallel play right now, which is okay at the start, like the students in the classroom, but they're doing something entirely different. They're not really engaging with the core content. That's the sort of mark for success in that Tier 1, and that's the reason for those other things. And if I didn't make that connection, that's the whole point, is that how do we help our teachers build that muscle memory without having to create an individual plan for all 30 kids in their classroom? What does the planning look like? What is the different ways of engaging content? And that's one of the reasons I put it in that NPR thing the other day, but she didn't use it. One of the uses of AI that is so unreal is the ability to take a concept and immediately differentiate it across multiple sort of access points. And so that's what we're looking for in the Tier 1 instruction, is how do we help our teachers without running them into the ground? How do we help them develop that skill set and that ability to sort of do that as part of their everyday practice, so that it's not something that is so sort of taxing because you're having to think about it, and really it's just part of our practice. That's just the way we plan around content.
Yeah, thank you. And I would love, sorry, I may be planning future board meetings here, but that's what I would really love to deep dive on, because I think, I'll flat out say it. There's still a lot of ableism in our society, in our schools, in our communities. That's just a fact. Limiting what we think a student on an IEP can do. And my hope is that we're moving closer to that academic piece. So often I hear my they're so happy, the student on an IEP, they're able to participate in music and PE, and really being able to integrate them academically and believe that they are capable of being integrated academically into a general education classroom is what I hope we're marching to. Understood, it's really hard, and so it's okay that we're not there yet. But I would love to just understand better how we're progressing towards that, and I think that might help with some of the concerns we're hearing of, like, what's the big deal? I think if we can help the community start to see that, that will be when we get that buy-in.
Director Yoakum?
I just want to thank you for saying that we don't know how to meaningfully include students outside that range. And I just so appreciate that rather than we don't. And I think just acknowledging that is huge and that this is what we're trying to achieve. But yes, we're not there. We haven't done this yet. That's expected. But what I'm hopeful for is coming from that study session of OE3 and building partnerships and including families and community with this is there's this whole source of other humans we have that can help with this as well. You know, it doesn't always have to be on the staff, you know, it can be including and asking more from those parents. And as a parent of somebody whose student is outside that range, and I can tell you that is much appreciated because I do feel like an expert on my child, and to be able to help teach my child's teachers is a benefit to him and all of the students in his class. So one, I just think that acknowledgement, I just want to acknowledge you for saying that, and I so appreciate it because I think so much we fear saying that we don't know and we're not doing it, and I just kind of want to normalize that more. And I mean, we ask that of our students, and so let's model that, and thank you. You did an awesome job saying that. I had a question about MTSS coaches, but I can save it for later.
Fair enough. Does anybody else have a final question?
Quick one on MTSS.
Director
Are they
Guthrie.
just at elementary or secondary too?
Currently just at elementary. Although we did add deans to the middle school last year. We funded those, and we're sort of, at the time, we're thinking about them more in sort of the MTSS-B behavioral support. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we are done with questions. I just want to say I very much appreciate this update. I understand that we've only rolled out inclusion to all of our elementary schools. It's only been 4 months, and it seems a little early to be asking for an update, but it's so crucial to so many families. I really appreciate the effort that went into trying to explain kind of where we're at and what we have to look forward to. So thank you very much. The next item on our agenda this evening is Public and Community Affairs. This portion of the business meeting of the board is an opportunity for any board members to inform and provide updates from organizations or groups they engage with on behalf of Lake Washington School District. I believe we have a ledge update from Deputy Superintendent Gillingham.
Good evening. I'll just provide a quick legislative update. We're in the third week of the legislative session that started January 8th. January 31st is the Committee of Origin cutoff, so bills that do not advance at that point will not have an opportunity for consideration. And then after that, the next milestone is the Fiscal Committee cutoff on February 5th. Again, just a reminder, it's a short session in the second biennial session. So Lake Washington School District has testified on 9 bills related to our legislative priorities with a combination of written and virtual testimony since the start of the session. We're scheduled to testify on 4 bills this week related to school construction funding and special education. 2 of those bills are related to our non-voted debt bill, allowing the use of LGO, limited general obligation bonds, funds to be used consistently with how bond funds use. So it's just another tool that we can use to utilize our voter-approved capital levy funds. There's a Senate Bill 5969. We had a hearing today. House Bill 2411, the hearing is on Thursday. So we'll be testifying. We testified today, and we'll testify on Thursday. A few board members and staff will be meeting with Representative Del Medi tomorrow. Board members and our student representative, Shivani Sama, and staff will visit Olympia on Wednesday to meet with the Education Committee leaders and advocate for our priorities. And district staff will participate in the WASA Ledge Conference this Sunday. The other good news I wanted to share is we were notified 2 weeks ago that we were approved for round 2 clean school bus grant from the EPA. So we are going to receive funding to purchase 2 zero-emission buses. This is really exciting news. We've been trying to get a grant for quite a while. We applied with a group of 16 other districts, and a state-approved vendor, RWC, was the lead in that as the applicant, and that allowed us to qualify for Title I prioritization and met the minimum application requirements. So the 2 buses will be used for our Title I school routes. We are continuing to apply. There's a round 3 application due at the end of the month. And then we will need additional grants to fund the required infrastructure for the electric buses. So some exciting news there. So that's my quick update. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Director Stewart, do you have any additional ledge updates?
I have nothing really to add to that rather complete report. Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything for public and community affairs? Okay, then the next item on the agenda is school visits. Unfortunately, we did have to cancel our January 18th school visits due to the weather conditions. Our next school board visits will take place on February 6th. I don't have the locations yet. Okay, so pending. Does anybody have an update about schools? Nope. Okay. And then we are missing the committee. Okay. The next item on our agenda would be committee updates. Does anybody have any updates on their committees that they are sitting on? Director Guthrie.
The literacy, the reading advisory committee, I don't know, we have different titles for it, but we met, split in 2 sessions. I attended on January 11th. We spent some time talking about mutually supportive content integration, which the board heard about in our last study session, I think it was. So going over that with teachers and getting their thoughts. There was a lot of excitement, also a lot of trepidation. It's a very new way of doing things. And so there was a lot of reassurance. This is not something that we are rolling out tomorrow. This is very much a journey. We talked about learning progressions, which I think ties into a little bit of what Deputy Superintendent Beebe was just talking about, of sort of looking at standards and if a student is maybe not at grade level for a particular standard, what are the standards that they're at and how are they progressing towards that grade level instruction? We had a presentation on assistive technology too, which ties in a lot to universal design for learning, as we were just talking about, really thinking about accessibility from the start. For example, if we're looking at a literacy curriculum, making sure that it's accessible to students who use screen readers or who use text-to-speech, that sort of thing. Yeah, and then talking a little bit about the request for information that's going out and for actual curricula to start looking at.
Thank you. Director Yoakum.
So I participate in 2 strategic planning committee meetings, and one committee is focused on creating a profile for future students and kind of like when a future graduate leaves our system, what knowledge, skills, and attributes will they walk away with is sort of what they're kind of tasked with right now. And then the other committee is working on a very similar profile, but more focused on staff. Both of these groups met on January 11th at the same time, at the same place, so I was able to run back and forth between both groups. And I believe Director Stewart sits on the strategic planning committee that's focused on the greater organization. All of these 3 groups are working separately, but I think these ideas are being shared or will be shared eventually. And the student group has said at one point, or I overheard that, the student profile will have direct implications on staff. And then the staff group has also said, well, if we want our staff to be XYZ, then the organization needs to support that and create a culture that encourages XYZ. So I think the groups are kind of all seeing how all of these merge together. And it's kind of interesting to, again, run back and forth to see the conversations between the 2. Really impressed with the discussion with staff, admin directors, students, parents, community members in these groups. And I think everyone in the group was sort of in agreement that this work is a lot harder than they expected. They're essentially trying to envision the future of education. So I think it's exciting work, but hard work.
Director Stewart?
Whoops. Ours was canceled thanks to the weather, so it's a rather succinct
Director La Liberty?
On the 11th, I attended the Budget Advisory Committee meeting here in the Resource Center. The committee provided input on some of the options for the timing of any potential cuts over the next couple of years, or budget reductions over the next couple of years, and also identified additional risks or opportunities for some of those. And I understand that will be coming back to the board the next time. That feedback will be coming back to the board the next time we talk about the budget. The Facilities Advisory Committee meeting, unfortunately, was lost to the weather. One last thing, as soon as the Budget Advisory Committee ended, I ran. Well, I didn't run. I walked about 20 feet over to the foundation meeting. I now have the chance to attend that in Leia's stead. I said I was your replacement, and people kind of guffawed at me for that. But and I had a chance to hear a presentation on the Pantry Pack program that they are continuing to expand, and also an attempt to standardize or have a consistent set of offerings across the district, an equitable set of offerings, is another way of saying that. And it was really interesting to hear that program, which provides a lot of benefit and also provides a lot of opportunity for community engagement within our district. And then I talked to the foundation about our ongoing facilities work and some of the thinking around the plan. And so, thank you.
Thank you. I'll give a quick update on the two committees I'm sitting on. I am sitting on the highly capable Quest Evaluation Committee for K through 8, and then also the High School Student Day Evaluation Committees. In general, I think they're both kind of in the same place where we're still doing collective learning, level setting before we get into the hard conversations. For now, I would just like to thank everybody that volunteers to be on these committees, because it is a substantial amount of time and commitment that they are giving up to participate, and it's such important work. I just really am amazed at how much people are willing to give of their time in recognition of the very difficult conversations that we're having. And so thank you for now, and I'll provide another update soon. The next item on the board is a review of future board business. The board has an extended study session on February 3rd from 8 to 3:30 here at the Resource Center, followed by a board meeting on February 5th, study session at 5, and a board meeting at 7 p.m. The board is now going to meet in executive session for 2 hours. Executive sessions are closed to the public. No formal board action will be taken this evening following the exec sessions, and the January 22nd, 2024 board meeting will be adjourned at 11:20 p.m. In the event additional time is needed in exec session, an announcement will be made, and the adjournment time will be adjusted. The purpose of tonight's exec sessions are as follows: to evaluate complaints or charges brought against a public officer or employee, and to evaluate complaints or charges brought against a public officer or employee, and to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency matters relating to agency enforcement actions, or to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency litigation or potential litigation to which the agency, the governing body, or a member acting in an official capacity is or is likely to become a party when public knowledge regarding the discussion is likely to result in an adverse legal or financial consequence to the agency. The board will now convene into executive session at 9:20 p.m. Thank you.